This videotape has been produced to be used as an aid in demonstrating different tree care-related work, techniques, and skills. The videotape is intended for use only by or in conjunction with trained staff. It may be used as part of, but not as a replacement for, a comprehensive training program. The ideas, procedures, and observations demonstrated in the videotape must be analyzed and at times modified to meet the specific needs of the individual situation. While the video provides some detailed explanations and demonstrations about different equipment and techniques, actual use requires knowledge of and experience with the equipment and techniques prior to use in an actual work environment. Be sure to understand the proper use of all equipment required and use safe work practices at all times. Familiarize yourself with local, state, provincial, national, or federal government standards as applicable to the job assignment and requirements. Refer to your company employee training manual for the specific standards related to job performance, required and recommended personal protective equipment, and safe working practices related to the job assignment. The information and practices portrayed in this video are current as of time of production, which may or may not be the most effective or applicable at the date of viewing.
After watching this video, the arborist will learn to identify the various parts of a line, select knots that are appropriate for use in various climbing and rigging scenarios, tie, dress, and set the primary knots used in climbing and rigging.
For additional information and tree climber training materials, the International Society of Arboriculture recommends The Tree Climber's Guide by Sharon Lilly, Arborist's Equipment by Don Blair, which includes a CEU workbook worth 10 credits, and the complete line of Arbor Master training videos hosted by Ken Palmer and Rip Tompkins. Each video series comes with a study guide and CEU workbook. Also available from ISA, the ANSI Z133 standards for tree care operations.
ISA wishes to thank the sponsors of this video series: Husqvarna, Vermeer Manufacturing, Samson Rope Technologies, Buckingham Manufacturing, and Arbormaster Training.
Get the lock, Jack. You never use a hitch no more, no more, no more, no more. Get the lock, Jack. You never use a hitch no more. What's that you say? Get the lock, Jack. You never use a hitch no more, no more, no more, no more. Get the lock, Jack. You never use a hitch no more. Well, boss, oh boss, I'm a little confused. You said that knot you learned was the best you'd ever use. And now you say this thing's so nice. But good God Almighty, just look at the price. Get the line, Jack. You'll never use a hitch no more, no more, no more, no more. Get the line, Jack. You'll never use a hitch no more. What's that you say? Get the lock, Jack. You'll never use a hitch no more, no more, no more, no more. You get the lock, Jack, and you'll never use a hitch no more.
You know, Rip, I started climbing a few years back, and we used a taut line hitch every day.
You know, Ken, one of the rumors that I've heard going around is that not only were you using a taut line hitch, but you were climbing out of a bowline and a bight on 3-strand manila.
Now, I don't go that far back, but I did climb using manila rope. And because the manila rope, natural fiber, was so much stiffer, we didn't often use a stopper knot. It wasn't until we started to use the synthetic ropes, and they roll so much more because they're so much softer and the characteristics are different, that we realized that we needed to be using a stopper knot anytime we have an open system like this.
That's right, but times certainly have changed. Now climbers are climbing in split-tail climbing systems. There's a whole variety of new climbing hitches on the scene, and really depending on the job I'm doing, I don't even use the same climbing hitch 2 days in a row.
That's right, and depending on the climbing system that a person has chosen, you may use one type of an anchor hitch versus another. It's important to choose the right one for any given application. Here, you're using a splice to attach, in the split tail system, the end of your rope to the carabiner in the saddle. If you didn't have a splice in the rope, then you'd need to choose the right anchor hitch.
Absolutely. Why don't we go take a look at some of the handful of different knots that are being used in climbing systems these days, and make sure we pay particularly close attention to the various limitations.
I think that'll be a real big help.
All right, let's do it.
Before we start tying knots, I want to encourage you to use the manual that we've created to go along with the video. Now, there are many nuances and there are many usages of the knots we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at limitations and some of the uses, but again, I want to encourage you to use the manual because there's a lot of supplemental information. It'll be very useful to you as you go to tie these knots for yourself. I'd like to introduce Sean Gear with Arbor Master Training. Sean, could I get you to begin by introducing the parts of the line? Why don't we start there?
No problem. Before we can actually discuss the various knots, we need to agree on some terminology for the parts of the line. I have the working end of the line, and this will be the part that we'll be using. We'll be tying knots with this. The opposite end, that part not in use, will be the running end. The standing part will be everything in between. It's helpful to understand a few terms so we can break knots down to their component parts. We can have a bight in the line, and this will be an uncrossed section of the rope. We can have a loop in the line, and this will be a crossed bight. If we have a loop around an object, that would be a turn. Now we have two loops around an object, that would be a round turn. Now a knot is a general term. I'd like to introduce a couple more specific terms that are a little more descriptive. Now a hitch would be using the working end of the rope and affixing it either to an object, such as in a clove hitch, or to the standing part of the line, as in a taut line hitch. Now a bend could be used to affix two separate lines, such as in a Zeppelin bend, or the opposite ends of one rope, such as in a double fisherman's bend. Now let's see if we can employ some of these knot terms and tie a simple bowline. I'll make a counterclockwise loop in the standing part of the rope. I'll take the working end and pass it up through the loop, around the standing part of the rope, and back down into the loop, making sure that my working end is inside of the loop. Now I tie the knot, I'll dress it or align the parts so they're in their proper place, and I'll set the knot or tighten it. Now you can see I've created a bight within a loop, and that's how we can break knots down into their component parts. For over 100 years, this has been the traditional climbing system in North America. This is a closed system, basically an attachment knot to a snap or a carabiner even, leaving a long tail for the bridge and a friction hitch on the standing part of the line. Now, with the growing popularity of the split tail system, basically splitting off the tail, we still need some sort of termination knot to attach the climbing line to a snap or even to a carabiner. Now, using the bowline here in this system is just fine. We could also use the bowline in a split tail system. Now, bowline is certainly a good, strong, secure knot, but there are some limitations when it's used with this carabiner, in that we know we'd like to load the carabiner along the major axis or along the spine. The bowline's a little bit hard to snug down, so as we're climbing around, we might get some flopping around of the carabiner and even a side load.
You know, Sean, another limitation of the bowline is that it can accidentally untie itself when repeatedly loaded and unloaded. That's why the bowline may not be the best choice for a termination knot, especially onto a carabiner.
I want to show another option for a termination knot. Let's take a look at the anchor hitch. I'm going to attach this line into this carabiner. I'm going to start by taking the working end and passing it up through the carabiner, and I'll pass it around, forming a turn. I'm going to bring it around again, forming a round turn. I'll then take the working end, pass it behind the standing part, and back through the two turns. I pull the working end through, then I can dress the knot and set it. You see that snugs down nicely onto the carabiner. Notice as I fashioned the anchor hitch, I worked the turns away from the spine. This way, when the line does load, it will load down along the spine of the carabiner. Now, you may want to put a stopper knot here, or I could finish this off with a half hitch, but if the anchor hitch is tied, dressed, and set properly, it will not roll out. And it's fairly easy to untie. I can simply take this turn, peel it back up and over, and it undoes itself nice and easily. So the anchor hitch is one good option for a termination knot.
Another popular choice of termination hitches is the bunt line hitch. I'll start by passing the working end of the climbing line through my carabiner. Then I'll bring both parts of the rope alongside of one another, and then I'll form a turn going into a crossed round turn. Notice my thumb underneath the cross. I'll pass the working end just under the cross. Now if we look, we'll see that we formed a clove hitch, but notice that the working end will jam down against the carabiner. That is vital, okay? It's absolutely vital. Now notice that once it tightens down, we have only one part of rope in the connecting link. Sometimes we need to pay attention to that. We may not have room but for one part, okay? Let me just back this off. And again, I just want to mention that the working end must be the part that jams down against the carabiner. The working end is on the other side or the top side. You have only two half hitches. That is not a bunt line hitch. Be sure to tie this hitch properly. Now let's move to another termination hitch, and we'll begin the same way. We've passed the working end through the carabiner and then formed a loop going into a round turn. So we've started exactly the same way. Notice my thumb in the same place. Rather than passing through the side, I will pass up through the bottom or by the end of my thumb and under the cross. And then I tension down the parts, and the double fisherman's hitch will tighten up. Now in half-inch rope, I prefer to use a triple fisherman's hitch. We're adding a little more rope, we'll have a little more friction, and a little more security, if you will. I start the same way. Rather than going in the side for the bunt line hitch or through the bottom for the double, I come around one more time and I go to the triple fisherman's hitch. Now, notice that in this case, the working end is parallel to and right alongside of the standing part. That is something that some people appreciate for some situations. But with this particular termination hitch, it has a tendency to tighten down on the hardware, or the attachment point, to the point that it would be very difficult to loosen unless, for example, in this case, where I can simply remove the carabiner from the hitch and then I can disable it this way. If I were to have tied into a snap where I have a committed eye, That would be a lot more difficult to untie probably, especially if it was tightened down well, because I cannot slip the carabiner out.
You know, Ken, double fishermans can be used to form a bend also. I've got a shorter length of smaller diameter kern mantle cord. To form the double fisherman's bend, what I'll do is take the two ends of the rope, laying my fingers aside each one. I'll place them so the ends are going in opposite directions, and I'll take my working end, working over my index finger. I'll take a turn and make it a crossed round turn. Now I'll remove my finger and place the end back through. I can tighten it down a little bit. Now I'll flip the entire loop over, and I can do exactly the same thing, just repeat the process. Make a turn, make it a crossed round turn, remove my finger, and put the end back through. Really making sure that I've got at least 2 to 3 inches of tail hanging out. Now, I've tied the knot, I dress it, and align the parts. Notice I have 2 crosses on this side and 4 bars on the other side. And now I set the double fisherman's bend, and we're ready to put this loop to work.
Now it's time to talk about climbing hitches.
Say, Ken, what have you been climbing with these days?
It really depends on the saddle that I have on, the system that I choose to use, and it depends on what I'm doing. Why don't we start with something basic like the taut line hitch? Both of us are using a split tail system. So I've got a tail piece here in my hand, and let's take a look at the taut line hitch and the dynamics of it. We're going to start by making a turn